So we have another edition of Americans realizing just how strange the USA is after living or traveling abroad. Without further ado, let's get into this first video.
Some reverse culture shocks that I experienced as an American who lived in Europe for 4 years and recently moved back to America. The first one would be driving. As an American, I grew up driving literally everywhere. I had no option to walk anywhere from my house. I lived in a place where everything was super far away, so you needed a car to get anywhere. I thought that was normal, living in the suburbs, you do need a car to get places, but when I moved to Ireland, anyone who lived in the suburbs could walk to a shop.
Exactly. One of the biggest shocks that I had in the Netherlands was actually in the last month that we were there. In the last month that my girlfriend and I spent in the Netherlands, we went to this town called Fassen. Basically, it's a town of around 12,000 people. Now, in any American town of 12,000 people, you'd be hard pressed to find sidewalks in a lot of those places. And you definitely won't have a whole lot of things that are walkable or bikeable. But this was a place that when I tell you it was rural, I'm talking about there were horse farms and just all types of farms and houses that had literal acres and acres of land, full forests surrounding them. And yet you could still, within a 5 to 10 minute bike ride, get to a local recreation center. You could get to a gym, you could get to multiple grocery stores, you had a downtown area with shops, you had everything you need. You had a plaza, all of that. And one of the biggest differences between European small towns and American small towns, and if you're European and it's different in your country, let me know in the comments, but at least in the Netherlands, is that the small towns tend to be very dense. So they're almost like small cities in a sense, except that they're just smaller than the bigger cities. Whereas in the US, a town is structurally very different, categorically different than a downtown city center type of area.
Could walk to a grocery store. Everywhere was pretty much walkable, meaning you didn't need to live in the middle of a city to be able to walk somewhere. I got so used to walking literally everywhere. For the 4 years that I lived there, I did not have a car, so
She pretty much just doubled down on exactly what I said, which is that in the US, in order to have that walkability and that public transit, the bikeability, in order to have the density in general, you literally have to live in a downtown area. And even then, a lot of downtown areas in this day and age are pretty dead. I mean, downtown Dallas, for example, it's kind of dead. There are a lot of just big parking lots, and after around 5 or 6 p.m., everyone leaves from work and a lot of the city is just dead. It's just not a lot of activity going on. You would see more activity in a Dutch suburb than you would in downtown Dallas. But to get a similar experience, if you're an American who's never been to Europe, you would have to go to Boston, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., or New York City. Those are kind of your four main options. Maybe Chicago as well, downtown Chicago. That would kind of give you a similar way of living as European suburbs give you. But imagine those cities without the skyscrapers and without the exorbitant cost of living. And you kind of get a sense for how Europeans are living. And the thing is, I know I always bring this up, but this is kind of criminal if you think about it, because the fact that Americans have to choose between living in a very high cost of living city, a place like San Francisco where rent is starting at $3,000 a month, and that's no exaggeration, starting at $3,000 a month. New York City, rent is starting at $3,000 a month. We're talking about cities that are just as expensive, if not more expensive, than a place like Zurich, Switzerland. You have to choose between that cost of living and needing a car. And I think that's a big part of why Americans struggle to get ahead, is because you kind of just have to pick your poison.
I would walk everywhere, bike everywhere, or take public transportation. Coming back to America and having to readjust to driving everywhere again made me feel so lazy and wonder why can other countries have such walkable places, but the infrastructure in America was built so that people who don't live in cities cannot walk to get places.
Well, the reason why that's the case is because of corruption. It's lobbying from the automotive companies, from the oil companies. They're paying the politicians to pass legislation that all but prevents walkability, bikeability, and public transit. And then you also have the I think they're called NIMBYs or whatever, not in my backyard. People who don't want public transit and affordable, dense housing in their immediate areas because it would lower their property values or whatever. You see a lot of that in the US, especially in some of those very high cost of living cities like San Francisco or some of the wealthier parts of Dallas, for example. That's why those areas are inaccessible by public transit. But that's a different discussion for a different day. It's corruption, and Americans simply aren't aware of the fact that it's going on because Americans don't really know what's going on outside of their borders, so they don't know what to compare it to.
Second thing would be quality of service, and this can be a good and a bad thing. Service in America is much faster, much more efficient, which is nice because who doesn't like that? For example, if you're going out to eat in America, your waiter or waitress will come right up to your table and give you a lot of attention, be super kind, and really engaging. The reason I say that this could be a bad thing also is because when you go out to eat in America, you feel much more rushed. Things are super quick. Your food's on your table right away. You eat, pay the check, and leave.
Yeah, and that's not by coincidence. The reason why they're engaging with you and why they're being so friendly and enthusiastic and coming back to your table every 5 minutes to check on how things are going is because they want you to leave. They want to get you in and out. And once you've paid, you are pretty much dead to them. And I know that might be a bit of an exaggeration. There are servers out there who do actually care about the well-being of their customers, but they're few and far in between. People ultimately are at work and they want to make as much money as possible. And I don't blame them for that. I really don't. But in Europe, the servers are simply not incentivized to operate that way because they're getting paid a livable wage, or at the very least, they're getting paid minimum wage. So they don't have to worry about trying to get you in and out of the restaurant in 45 minutes or less. And yes, that is an actual thing. When I worked at a restaurant, I found out that they try to get you in and out in 45 minutes or less. They don't really care to do that because it's not going to make them any extra money. So it's less work for them. It's less trouble for you. Everybody wins.
In Europe, going out to eat is much more of a social event. It takes longer. Sometimes you're sitting at a restaurant for hours. Furthermore, a reason why I believe the service is so much quicker and more efficient in America is because service workers live off of tips. Typically in Europe, they get an hourly wage. A third thing that was a huge...
Also, I think when we look at retail stores, for example, where the workers are not getting tipped and they do make more than minimum wage, you're still expected as a retail worker, I say this as someone who used to work retail, you're still expected to sort of cater to the will of the customers. So that saying, the customer is always right, people really take that saying out of context in the US, and they build whole entire customer service models based on that fallacious principle. Whereas in Europe, what I found very quickly was that that is not the case. Hence why you don't see a whole lot of Karen culture going on out there. It's because that sort of behavior is not rewarded. And when you don't reward a certain type of behavior, generally it's going to stop.
Shock to me was the lack of vacation time. When I worked in Ireland, I had 29 days of paid vacation. I knew coming to America, I would probably get less, but I thought I'd be able to deal with it. I thought it wouldn't bother me as much. I get about 12 days of vacation a year. I find that that has really negatively impacted my quality of life and my mental health. I could definitely go on about this because there's so much more, but
she lost over 2 full weeks of vacation. Over 2 full weeks of vacation. Look, I'm not here to judge anyone's life decisions, but when I see people moving back to the US, unless it's for family reasons or anything pertaining to your personal life, just being closer to your parents or, yeah, basically just family reasons, I can't think of a good reason to move back to the US. I don't ever feel inclined to even visit the US at this point in time. The only reason why I would go back would be to visit my family and friends. But other than that, there's nothing there that I want to see. Definitely don't want to move there, and I sure as hell don't want to raise children there. So, I don't know, when I see videos like this, I do feel a little bit confused, but to each their own. Maybe she will be an agent for positive change in the US. She can take the information that she gathered from living in, I guess, Ireland for 4 years back to the US and use that to raise awareness to how Americans are being scammed. I don't know. On to the next video.
I left the US and moved to the UK 4 years ago, and I'm never planning on moving back to the States, but I am back for the summer, and I'm getting like reverse culture shock. So these are the things that are doing it for me. First of all, you really do have to drive everywhere. I'm currently in what is actually considered a pretty walkable neighborhood where I'm staying with my dad right now, and even then I have to drive to the grocery store, I have to drive to the coffee shops, I have to drive to to get everything that I need.
And again, even if you can technically walk somewhere in the US, you can tell that pedestrians are an afterthought. So not only is the infrastructure not necessarily ideal for pedestrians in most of the US, where you have situations where the sidewalk will just end, or it'll take you on some long path where suddenly it takes you an hour to walk somewhere that it should have taken you 15 minutes to walk to, things of that nature. But you'll also find that in a lot of the country, drivers tend to be very hostile toward pedestrians and cyclists as well. And for example, I filmed a video with my girlfriend when we went back to the US to visit earlier this year. And in the video, we basically cycled from an American neighborhood to a Target grocery store. I want to say the video took around 40 minutes to film, so it was a 40-minute bike ride because the Target was pretty far. But the biggest thing that really shocked my girlfriend coming from the Netherlands and having never really biked in the US prior to that, I don't think at least, wasn't anything that happened on camera. It was what happened when we turned the camera off. And we had the pedestrian walk signal, which in the US doubles as a bike signal, because in Dallas, you do not bike on the street unless you want to get hit. So we got the pedestrian walk signal, and I guess that also corresponded with the traffic lights being green, coming in that same direction. Well, this UPS driver in one of those big trucks decided he wanted to make a right turn. But again, we had the right of way because we were pedestrians and we had the walk signal. So we start pedaling across and he goes to cut us off. And I think he stopped and we stopped, and then he continued, instead of deferring to us, he continued to drive. And then as he was passing by, he looked at us and he was like, and he pointed to the green light. And in that moment, I knew, okay, this is somebody who is making a living from driving, from delivering things. And he's driving this big ass truck on top of that. This right here pretty much takes away all hope that America, the USA, is going to be walkable or bikeable anytime in the near future. Because it's not just an infrastructure issue, it's a cultural issue.
Even a lot of places that technically I could walk to, the paths that I would need to use to walk there are either right next to the road or made for bikes instead of pedestrians, which is like a step in the right direction, but you still just can't walk places.
Well, it's nice that they at least have cycling paths because, again, in Dallas, you just ride on the sidewalk.
Books are also way more expensive, and I've never noticed this one before. But I had to buy a hardback yesterday for $32. A paperback in the UK is, I think, £9, and a hardback is usually around 15, which is at max like 20 US dollars. And I never put together how much more expensive it is to get books here.
That's something I never really noticed. I use a Kindle, so the price is the same for me no matter where I'm at. Let me know if that's something you've noticed as well. What is the average price of a book where you live? I'm sure it depends on the niche of the book, but that's something I never really stopped to consider. I'll have to ask my girlfriend about that too, because she's definitely bought books in multiple countries.
Third, I think, has to be that the fast food meat is much lower quality here. This has to do with like EU and UK regulations of meat quality and all that stuff are generally higher, but specifically at fast food restaurants, the meat's just bad here, and it's so much better in the UK, but it's not any more expensive in the UK. Last but not least,
yeah, when I was in high school, I had a friend who had a brother who worked at Taco Bell, and he told me that at Taco Bell they basically have powdered meat and then they just add water and they cook it like that. That was when I decided I was never eating Taco Bell again. In fact, I don't think I ever ate at a conventional fast food restaurant ever again after that. I think the closest I ever came was eating Chipotle, which is kind of in a different category. Never ate Taco Bell again, not even overseas. Never ate McDonald's, Burger King. I just stopped all of that in that one moment because that is not something you should be putting into your body.
The ads are so aggressive. Like the ads on TV, the ads on the radio, they're just like, everyone's yelling. And again, this is so silly because I grew up with all of this stuff. Like, of course I'm used to it. I've just been gone for 4 years and I come back and for some reason it's surprising me. There's definitely things in the UK that...
So as far as the ads go, I think that something else that really shocked me personally, aside from the intensity of the ads, which, to be fair, being here in Asia, I've been to Thailand and now we're in Vietnam, heading to Malaysia next. I would actually venture to say that the advertisements are more aggressive here, or maybe not more aggressive. I don't really know the language, so can't really comment on the aggression in the actual wording of the ads, but they're more stimulating. A lot more bright lights and loud music, upbeat music, bright colors, things of that nature. People with more exaggerated facial expressions. That's been a pretty big culture shock for me. But in the US, seeing just the sheer volume of advertisements, the amount of billboards and commercials and just all types of advertising everywhere, it definitely gets a bit exhausting after a while.